wide open. I don't know if there's a dog in the back getting some fresh air. I don't know if there's people stealing all your fishing stuff out of there, but did anybody inadvertently leave your hatch open on the back of your car?
What kind of car?
I don't have that. I just got a test. So I can run out and look at all the cars, but okay. Welcome to the River Center, everybody. I'm Rick LaFaro, Executive Director here. Great to see so many friends. Many of you know me as Rico, but even better to see some new faces that I haven't seen particularly here before. So, quick show of hands. Is this your first time in the River Center? Fantastic. Well, this building and this evening were really dreams of this organization since our inception. And we are, if everybody could kindly put your phones on polite mode.
Loud music.
Something I can dance to. One of our founding board members, Carter Brookshire, always had the idea, along with many of the founding board members, to have a river center, a facility like this dedicated specifically to river and water issues, but also to have a watershed institute. And the foundation of this organization is built on education. We have a very robust education program for the public and in schools, literally from Aspen to Glenwood Springs and from Meredith to Marble. But we are also very active and aggressively pursuing lots of science and policy on local rivers. So we are the nonprofit organization for the Roaring Fork watershed. We're very proud of this facility. We're very proud of the work that we do. I have a wonderful staff. I've been with the organization for 21 years now, so I've kind of come along for the whole ride, and I'm probably the most happy about the creation and completion of the River Center. I'm also the most nervous with salami and red wine in the room and all that stuff, so please don't spill on my carpet. So this is the first night, this is the inaugural kickoff of the Brookshire Watershed Institute, and Carter does not live here full time, so we're thrilled to be able to announce this and launch this speaker series in her honor and in her name. And really getting back to the educational part, so much of what we do is for little people and medium-sized people, and we do a lot of education for today's decision makers, but we really want to run the gamut from either an elementary school level class to the highest level of learning and pull in experts like Chris or visiting professors or whatnot. Everybody in this room is pretty keyed into water, and you know it is the natural resource issue of our time. We're always excited when it snows, we're always nervous when it doesn't. We're very focused on the river, and we're focused on the climate and the water that comes out of the sky to fuel that. So we're all very engaged, and we're very appreciative that you're here. Two groups of people that I want to call out. One real quickly, just quick wave from Pat McMahon, my board chair right here. He's the president of our board of directors. And then seated behind Pat, largely, and then back in the room, we have our river stewards here. So if you all could just quickly raise your hand. Not the entire group, but most of them. And this was a group sort of modeled after Young Professional Association. And these are 25 to 40-ish river enthusiasts. Many of them are starting to breach that 40-year mark. I see you guys laughing back there. I got kicked out a long time ago. But it's great to have them. They usually meet the first Tuesday of every month, and so they sort of made this their meeting and their gathering tonight. They help us out with a lot of our outreach events, our river float, river cleanup, some of those things, and honestly, they're just our young, hip folks to keep us current and plugged into the younger generation as we continue to age and get really excited about water wonky things and whatnot. They keep us cool with flat-brimmed hats and pictures of fish and stand-up paddleboarding and stuff like that. I want to quickly introduce Christina Medved. She's our Director of Community Outreach. She's going to say a few words about the organization real quickly, and then she'll introduce Chris, and we'll get on with the evening. So thank you all for being here.
This is our 23rd year as the river organization for the Roaring Valley, and it's, as Rick mentioned, it's very exciting for us to be in the River Center, to actually have our own home, to host our own Watershed Institute presentation. So in the past, we actually have offered some other Watershed Institutes One of them, for example, was the very first summit on why riparian areas are important. It was the very first one we offered in the Roaring Fork watershed. We had people from as far away as Denver attend that. And we also hosted the Deputy Director of Water for the Environmental Protection Agency a few years ago. So, you know, those presentations, we were always like looking around somewhere in the watershed that we could host these particular events. And so we're so excited that you're here. I'm really excited that Chris is here to kick this off for us. Chris has become a friend of mine as well as a colleague. I think you're really going to enjoy him as a person, his delivery style, and also learn a lot from the content. And so, Rick Gertie, I think mentioned this already, what we envisioned with the Watershed Institute is we want to elevate the conversation of water beyond the Roaring Fork Valley. I would say the folks in this room are, as Rick said, pretty in tune with what's going on with the rivers and streams here, but we're a small part of a much bigger river system. And so we want to bring water leaders here like this, and actually one of his colleagues will be here in 2 weeks to talk about cloud seeding, which maybe you've been reading about in the newspaper as well. We want to bring them here so that you can hear it from the experts themselves, what they're working on at these state, regional, national issues. And then we'll always bring it back in and say, well, here's how the Roaring Fork Conservancy is addressing this here in our own backyard, and here's how you can participate, and here's how you can learn more. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay, so without further delay, I'm going to go ahead and just give a little introduction to who Chris Trees is, and then the stage is yours. So Chris Trees is the Manager of External Affairs for the Colorado River Water Conservation District. Chris is also responsible for the River District's legislative and regulatory lobbying efforts in Denver and Washington, D.C. He's also responsible for the district's water education and information efforts. In short, this is my favorite line. Chris describes his job responsibilities as everything you don't want lawyers and engineers doing, including the occasional presentation to his friends at Roaring Fork Conservancy. Thank you. So Chris moved from Denver to the wetter, better side of Colorado in 1982 to be the boomtown advisor for Union Oil's oil shale project. You can talk to him about that after the presentation. He started with the River District in 1991, and now he lives in Glenwood Springs with his wife, Amy. Chris has a bachelor's and a master's degree in economics, which he finds largely irrelevant to his current work. Chris, come on up. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Christina. Thanks, Rick. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you coming out tonight. Couple things to remember. One is the introduction that I do have a couple degrees in economics, and while I don't find them particularly relevant, they're relevant to you because being an economist means I'm a rounder. If you want some real specific numbers, you want dead-on accuracy, go find an accountant. I'm very much into trends and a lot of hand-waving, as you'll watch me in my presentation style. The other is that I would really like this to be a conversation, so feel free to interrupt me, ask questions, challenge me. The conversation is much more important than the presentation. So with that, I will go ahead and start. And just a real quick, oh yes, that's right, power.
Oh.
The advanced. Now what? No, you had everybody silence their phones. Huh?
Did you test this before you
We
did?
did.
Oh, yes.
We did. There we go.
Okay.
Now you should be able to.
All right. So you say.
So I say.
Don't go away.
I won't. I'll be right here.
So the Colorado River District, real quickly about who I am and who I work for. You all are very familiar with the Roaring Fork River and the Roaring Fork Conservancy, which does an outstanding job of bringing you all and your neighbors, me and others, into the river and understanding and connecting to our rivers right here. The Colorado River District was created in 1937. So we've been around a long time, but we were created to ensure that Western Colorado always had a voice when somebody else had a good idea of what to do with the Colorado River. In 1937, we were named a Colorado River Water Conservation District. 1937, water conservation meant something a little different than it does today. Back then, it really meant to build a dam, conserve the spring runoff for year-round delivery, for year-round use, primarily consumptive uses. But we have evolved over that time and reflect, hopefully, the values of our constituency in northwest and west central Colorado, and recognize that conservation means not only conserving the spring runoff for year-round use, but also the more traditional and non-consumptive use and conservation. We are all of the Yampa River, the White River, the drainage of the main stem of the Colorado, including the Gunnison and the Uncompahgre rivers. So we are 15 counties in northwest and west central Colorado. We're governed by a 15-member board, not ironically, or not entirely coincidentally, to match the 15 counties. One board member appointed from each of the counties by the county commissioners for a 3-year term. We are funded exclusively through a mill levy for our general fund and a water enterprise fund for our water sales and water rights protection programs. We have, western Colorado is the wetter, better side of the mountains. We have 80% of the moisture falls on our side of the mountains. We only have about 10% of the population. So that was why we were created. We were created in conflict. We were created when the Colorado Big Thompson project was proposed for trans-mountain diversion, to take the headwaters of the Colorado River to northeast Colorado, primarily for then agriculture, all the way out the South Platte River from the Big Thompson River down to the Booter and onto the South Platte, and all the way out to the state line. Again, principally for agriculture. Today, more than well over half of that water has been converted from an agricultural use to a municipal use. Denver, of course, has their own systems of trans-mountain diversions. If you all don't know it, for Colorado it's important. 50% of Denver's water comes from western Colorado. Aurora, 30%. Colorado Springs, 70 to 80% of their water comes from western Colorado. So the River District is there to make sure that we're protected. And we also have an interstate responsibility to represent Colorado and western Colorado with our 6 sister states of the Colorado River, and to ensure that Colorado protects and develops the waters to which it's entitled under the 1922 Compact. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So in that, just the big geography of the river, and again, this is the Roaring Fork River in context of the Big River, as we refer to it. So from the headwaters to the Gulf of California, including the 2 states in Mexico that use and rely on the Colorado River, both for municipal, industrial, and agricultural uses. The Colorado River, you know it. You know the Green River coming out of Wyoming, the headwaters of the Colorado here. The Colorado River, for management purposes, is divided between an upper basin and a lower basin. The negotiators, one from each state, got together in the early 1920s to try to figure out how to allocate the river. The big concern then, as it is now, was that California was growing so fast and was so thirsty because of the very arid climate that is Southern California. And they were diverting the Colorado River for use outside of the basin, but in the state, which is legal. And so then the other 6 states worried that California was going to develop first and fast. And that if we applied prior appropriation, that first in time, first in right system throughout the basin on an interstate basis, we would only have an opportunity to watch the water as it went by. We would never have the opportunity to grow and develop as we have, because all that water would be owed to the senior water rights in California. So they divided the river between an upper and a lower basin. But what's also important here is in this slide is to look and see that in every state of the Colorado River, water is used outside the natural basin, and in fact is used, a majority of the water use is used outside the natural basin. So we talked about, from Pueblo to Fort Collins and all the way out the South Platte River to the Nebraska border. The Colorado River is used outside of the basin, but in the state. Cheyenne gets water from the Green River by Trans Mountain Diversion. Salt Lake City all the way to Provo through the Great Basin. A San Juan Chama project takes water from the San Juan River, diverts it down into and used all the way from Santa Fe all the way down the Rio Grande Basin. And then, of course, Southern California is using it in the very rich agricultural areas in the Coachella and Imperial basins, also Palo Verde, and then obviously the metropolitan area from Tijuana, including Tijuana, all the way up to Ventura in Southern California for municipal purposes. So it's a river of significant demand, and if you've got a lot of demand and you know we live in the arid West, that means we have a limited supply, you have a natural conflict set up. So here's the good news. So right now, this is yesterday's snow water, no, it's actually today's snow water equivalents. You all know, you're living it, we're enjoying it. The main stem of the Colorado, we have, main stem of the Colorado, we're at 112% on average. Statewide, we're at 106% of average with our snowfall this year. That's the good news. This is the requisite hydrograph that we have to show in any PowerPoint presentation. Here's the one. It is last year's water year. This is the average of all the water years and how it runs. As you know, you've got you don't really have anything until we begin to get a little snowpack, and then it peaks around April, drops off rather quickly with a fun and enjoyable runoff, and then reaches what we refer to as base flow that basically doesn't even show up on a graph. It's within the thickness of the line. But here we are this year. We're really following right along the average and now just creeping just above the average. So it's an encouraging year, but it's also a good news, bad news year. So here's the whole basin, and anything that's above a green to blue to purple is above average. It's or average or above average. So the snow conditions are very favorable, especially in the upper basin, which is where 95% of the water comes from for the entire basin. However, the soil moisture is very dry because of the long history we've had recently, the last 2 decades, of very dry years. And the soils have suffered, the forests have suffered, and the current projections are that while even though we enjoy 112% currently in the Colorado River Basin of snowpack above average, 12% above average, the projection is that the runoff into Lake Powell will be just 3/4, 75% of normal. The good news is that's up in the last 2 weeks from 2/3 to 3/4. But still, we are expecting a below average year. You will see what that means as we go along, why that's important. So this is the very busy histogram of the hydrology of the Colorado River starting in 1878. And we actually did have good gauge records all the way back on the main stem of the Colorado River, right down at the international boundary. So anybody that tells you, well, we didn't have very good data, isn't correct. And anybody that tells you that it was all because it was a very wet period is partially correct, but more importantly, the negotiators of the compact, those representatives from each of the 7 states, they looked at these data from here back, and what they saw mostly was a very erratic river. And so they realized that, number one, they were going to need storage if they were going to manage this river in any equitable manner. Number two, they were going to have to manage and share this river on a running average, not on an annual average, but on a running average. And you could only do that with storage. And so, as most of you know, that we created a 10-year running average and an obligation for the upper basin states to ensure deliveries to the lower basin states on a 10-year running average. So we can, theoretically, you can run a deficit, you can run a surplus. So the compact was signed here, and you see this is the 10-year running average. It was very favorable, but it still was only just at that moment, that 10-year running average was about 17.5 million acre feet. But they knew that that was not, that was not the trend of that 10-year running average. The other thing to notice is this gray line, and that's the running average year to date. That's just running it all the way out. And you can see that in fact it's pretty flat, or if anything, it is slowly declining. And here, just zooming in from 1964, just a more recent 50-year time period, to see what we've got. And the important thing here is that when we allocated, we thought there was 17.5 million acre feet, or they used 17.5 million acre feet at the 1922 compact. In fact, we know that the average is more like 11 to 14 million acre feet. In the last 30 years, or 30 years, it's been down below 11 million acre feet. We have over-allocated the river, and Mother Nature is under-delivering. So we have a classic demand-supply imbalance, putting a lie to my statement that I don't use my economics all the time. The other thing to notice here is that we have, this is the night, there are three, these last three bars are the 2019, the projections for the most probable, the minimum and the maximum, just based on history and forecasts. There's obviously a lot of variability in our system, and this is provided by the Colorado River Basin Forecast Center, a federal agency. So what's happening? So Lake Powell and Lake Mead. So Lake Powell, you all know, is a recreational amenity, but it is principally our savings account. It's where we store, it's how we manage that wild fluctuation, that annual hydrology that is completely unpredictable. And this is just from 2000, and this is, so that's the January of 2000, this is December 31st of 2004. In 4 years, we went from an almost full, Lake Powell's about 25 million acre feet, again, I'm a rounder, 25 million acre feet of capacity. It was nearly full back then, and it went down to 8 million acre feet. We lost 2/3 of the water in the reservoir. The space is still there, and that's important, and most of it was in this 2002 year that those of you who were here will remember well as a particularly dry year, particularly tough fishing year, a particularly bony floating year. And then we have recovered somewhat, and we get to 2012, 11, 12, we had dry years, and we've sort of bumped along since then. Last year, we all know, was another very dry year, and we've dropped down. So the real lesson here is to imagine what happens beyond here, because we're starting here. If you repeat this history at a starting point like this, you'll see how quickly we run into a very serious situation. And I'll talk about that. So, why is Lake Powell important? Lake Powell does a number of things. It ensures that we can make our deliveries to our lower basin neighbors and meet our obligations. It also produces a tremendous amount of power. And the revenue from that power pays for the federal reservoirs like Lake Powell and Root Eye and the Silt Project and Green Mountain Reservoir at the headwaters. It also pays for the Endangered Fish Recovery Program that allows us all to continue to use water while recovering the 4 listed fish of the upper Colorado River. It also provides for preference power, primarily for municipalities and for agriculture. And so it's the low-cost electricity that allow agriculture to continue to thrive throughout Colorado and throughout the Southwest. It also pays for the Grand Canyon Adaptive Management Program, working on recovering the beaches and the flows in the Grand Canyon. It pays for the Salinity Control Program on the Colorado River. Investments primarily here in Colorado, in western Colorado, with benefits primarily in the lower basin states, in the agricultural areas where the salt buildup becomes greater, in the Arizona and Southern California areas. Where do we care about that? Why do we care about that? When do we care about that? Right now. All your lettuce, all your vegetables right out there, all came from Southern California and Southern Arizona, all irrigated and grown with Colorado River water. It also, let's see, I think that, yeah. Oh, the other, if we can, this is important, if we no longer can release water from Lake Powell because the water levels are too low through the turbines, then we can't over time physically deliver the water. We can't move enough water out through the dam without going through the turbines to meet our compact obligations, to meet our numerical commitments to our lower basin states. And I'll talk about what happens if we get into a situation like that. For one example of, I mentioned that the Silt Project, or RUDI, all benefit from the revenues from power generation. So this is something, the Silt Project is Silt Mesa. It's the north side of the river from Newcastle to Rifle. That's all the Silt Project. The Silt Water Conservancy District manages that project primarily for irrigation. But it's a nearly 100-year-old project. It needed considerable improvements that will result in considerable conservation of quantity. It will improve the water quality by reducing the amount of leakage and seepage through canals, and that groundwater is no longer picking up salts that are native to this area and moving those to the Colorado River. So all that was an example of the $7.7 million that came from power revenues from what's called the Basin Fund that allowed the Silt Project to continue to improve both in operations as well as water quality and water quantity efficiencies. And so where is all that water used? So in Colorado, I mentioned the Colorado River is used statewide, on both sides of the basin, both sides of the mountains, and in fact it's the river of statewide interest. There are trans-mountain diversions from the Colorado River Basin into the North Platte, into the South Platte, into the Arkansas, and into the Rio Grande. So every basin other than the Republican River Basin, which most people don't know exists, on the very eastern plains, directly receives Colorado River water. So, but West Slope agriculture is the majority of our use. Importantly, of the 1.3 million used by agriculture in western Colorado, 1.1 predates the compact and is explicitly grandfathered, protected from being called out, from being curtailed in order to meet our interstate obligations. So that's an important number to remember. West Slope, municipal and industrial uses, fairly small sliver, barely, well less than 100,000 acre feet. East Slope agriculture uses about 180,000. East Slope municipal and industrial, so about 360 together. On an annual average basis, about 500,000 plus acre feet go to the eastern slope. Out of just the main stem of the Colorado, so this is all of the West Slope, all the tributaries that feed into the Colorado River, but if you just look at the main stem of the Colorado River from the headwaters to beyond Fruta and Mac, half of the water that's consumed from the Colorado River is consumed by western Colorado and half from eastern Colorado, so about 500,000 on each side of the divide. So this is a very busy slide, but it's really only up here for one principal purpose. And that's to begin the conversation about, okay, so I've established a significant problem, a serious challenge. Who's doing what about it? Where do we go from here? So there's really a three-legged stool in the plan to deal with an ongoing drought, and it will bring this all back to the Roaring Fork River. But one of them is augmentation, and that's a lot of cloud seeding that was mentioned, and 2 weeks, Christina?
28.
2 weeks, when does,
28.
28th, thank you.
28, yes, sorry.
Yeah, the 28th, so 2 weeks from Valentine's Day. My colleague Dave Kanzer will come up and talk specifically about this one element of the planning for how do we deal with drought. How do we just bring a little bit more moisture out of the clouds that are passing over when they're passing over. That's a plan to add water to the system. That's on the supply side. On the demand side for augmentation is removal of tamarisk and Russian olive. They are particularly thirsty and invasive species that tend to take over. They tend to create a monoculture in the environment. If any of you have rafted or canoed or boated in any, or you couldn't fish the Green River, for most of the Green River, because it is just one solid, dense forest of tamarisk, just one species. It is not a healthy riparian area. So that's one leg of the stool. Another leg of the stool is, I've talked about Lake Powell. In addition to Lake Powell, you all know Blue Mesa and the Aspinall unit in Gunnison County. That's another piece of the bigger Colorado River system. Flaming Gorge Reservoir on the Wyoming-Utah border is another, and Navajo Reservoir on the Colorado-New Mexico border is the fourth. Now, to put those in some perspective, I mentioned that Lake Powell is 25 million acre feet. Flaming Gorge is about 4 million acre feet. Navajo Reservoir is 2 million acre feet, and Aspinall or the Blue Mesa about less than 1 million acre feet. So much smaller, but they are, other than Blue Mesa this year, the others have remained relatively full, and we will move some of the water down from those reservoirs to maintain at least a power level, a power production level at Lake Powell, as well as that long-term assurance of meeting our obligations to our lower basin states. And the third element that I'll spend more time talking about is demand management. And it's saving water, but now I want to talk about water conservation in a very specific method. This is not turning your water off while you're brushing your teeth, because that water, it came out of the river, but it's going right back down through the system, through your wastewater treatment plant. It's returning to the river. What we need to do is save our current consumptive uses. We need to reduce our consumptive uses and save that and use that. And I'll talk more about what that means and how you do that. But also, but I want to talk about how we got to just where we are. It's easy to point fingers to the lower basin. I'm going to start right here, but I want to make sure that you remember that it's not just the lower basin's problem. Lower basin, California, Nevada, and Arizona. The inflow, these are primarily releases from Lake Powell, from our savings account, and the inflows that primarily come off the Mogollon Rim in Arizona, about 9 million acre feet a year on average. The outflow, with all the deliveries to including Mexico and the gains and losses along the system, is already puts us in a deficit because we use about 9.6 million acre feet. Lake Mead itself evaporates over 500,000, and the total means that you were running an annual average deficit of over 1 million acre feet.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you quantify acre feet?
Yeah, thank you. Great point. So acre foot is, so we measure CFS. You're all familiar with that from rafting and fishing. We measure flowing water in cubic feet per second. We measure stored water or water in a volume by acre feet. And it's the amount of water that it requires to cover an acre of land 1 foot deep. So what does that mean? Because that's not a real pretty picture. So that an acre of land is about the grassed area of Coors Field. An acre foot of water is what 2 families, average families of 4, use in a year. So that gives it some perspective, but I appreciate that. In the lower basin, they have historically overused it. We have overdeveloped the whole system of the Colorado River system, and we've got climate change. And climate change means less water, specifically less water in the river, and importantly, less water in the river. Some climate change models, they all say we'll be hotter. Some say we may be wetter, but it will not offset the increased use of water, both by man and by the natural environment in a longer, because of a longer and hotter growing season. If we don't meet our compact obligations to our lower basin states, ours, those upper basin states, if we don't meet our compact obligations, we're going to be shut off. Who's going to be shut off? Everybody post 1922. I mentioned the 1.1 million acre feet in agriculture that all is grandfathered from administration by the compact, with all the rest of us. And then, but even of that agriculture, agriculture in this area benefits from releases from Green Mountain Reservoir. They can continue to operate in the dry times because of releases from Green Mountain Reservoir. Green Mountain Reservoir is junior to the compact. Without the Green Mountain Reservoir releases, those senior water rights in the Grand Valley or Silt or other places won't be able to finish out a crop. And all of us, we will all be curtailed because we have an interstate obligation. And those compacts have been tested, those interstate agreements that we call compacts, they have been tested many times in the U.S. Supreme Court as legal battles between states, immediately are elevated to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has consistently upheld the compacts and basically said they're a contract. They're a contract that's enforceable on its face. That if the terms say we have to deliver 7.5 million acre feet to the lower basin every year, or 75 million over every 10-year period, that's what it means. It's, there's plenty left to interpretation, but there's enough that it's pretty obvious. So we're trying to figure out how to the junior rights are curtailed first, and that's critical storage for the Grand Valley, the Upper Padre Valley, all of us that rely on stored water. Front Range is going to be curtailed as well. Those trans-mountain diversions also have our junior rights. So we've developed among the 7 states a drought contingency plans, actually 2 separate drought contingency plans, one for the lower basin, one for the upper basin. Good news is the lower basins is much more immediate and much more dramatic. They are immediately having to curtail their use of water by their overuse of water, about 9 million acre feet, but they have a plan to curtail over 1 million acre feet of that. So they're curtailing about 15% of their current use. In the upper basin, we're trying to manage the water that we have. We're talking about curtailing uses, but only on a voluntary, a compensated, and a temporary basis. But again, that's a consumptive use. So it's primarily agriculture. Back to me. All right. So the goals in the upper basin, that we would have an account. We would have a pool in Lake Powell. Of that 60% of Lake Powell that's empty, we can use 500,000 acre feet of that space and put water in there that it's protected from normal operations of Lake Powell. That it sits there as our special savings account. Because we put it in there, we reduced our historical consumptive use deliberately for this purpose and this purpose only. So it sits there as a segregated account in Lake Powell, and it can only be used at the direction of the upper basin states, and it can only be used for to ensure compact compliance, to ensure fulfillment of the obligation. In other words, it prevents that curtailment catastrophe that I talked about.
How many acre feet is that?
How many acre feet? Is 500,000 acre feet. There is federal legislation going through the Congress right now that will give us that 500,000 acre-foot space for us to fill, and that account will be provided to us free of charge and at our exclusive use and only for that single purpose.
It's going through now, and can we expect to hear about that?
Yes, you can. You probably read that the Commissioner of Reclamation in December challenged all 7 states and said, you've got to come up with your own plan. She challenged us to come up with our own plan, or by the end of January, if we didn't come up with and deliver a plan to her, that she would begin promulgation of rules to ensure that she continues to comply with the law as the Secretary of the Interior, the Commissioner of Reclamation working for the Secretary of the Interior, is really the water master on the Colorado River in a big river sense. So she has begun that process because we have all 7 states that have agreed. We still have 2 holdout districts in the Southern California irrigation districts are holding out. They are holding out, hoping to leverage their holdout to ensure they get some money for salt and sea restoration, all part of the Colorado River system. We'll get to that in a minute. So anyway, this is just, that we have, this is the demand management policy statement. The River District pushed very hard on the state of Colorado. In fact, took a lot of heat. You may have read about that. The state was not happy with us. A lot of players in Colorado were not happy with us. Denver and municipalities, the irrigation districts on the eastern slope, very upset with what the Colorado River District was demanding. But we got essentially what we asked for. That we have an upper basin demand management schedule that is without charge, sorry, I'm having trouble with buttons, without charge, solely for the purpose of compliance with the compact, that the commission, that the 4 upper basin states can use this exclusively for compact compliance, that it's voluntary, temporary, and compensated for anybody that chooses to participate. Yes, sir?
So, the compact was what, 1922 or something?
That's correct.
Should it be rewritten? Do you think it should be? Will it be? Are you going to speak to that at all? Can it be?
I can answer all 3 of those questions with one word. No.
And why not? Well, let me ask you this. In your opinion, is it outdated?
No.
Okay,
No.
thanks.
But it's a great question and a very important question. Should it be? No. Is it outdated? No. Would it be written the same way today as it was in 1922? Absolutely not. But how would it be written differently? California would get a lot more water. Colorado would get a lot less water. All other 6 states would get a lot less water. There certainly would be environmental considerations included in the compact that weren't written into the compact. That would be something new, but that would also be something that would be an additional demand on a limited supply. We would have a lower number because we know now more, we know better what the hydrology of the basin is. But because the compact was written with some genius in mind. One is instead of dividing the states up, allocating the river to each of the 7 states, it instead put the states together and made them work together between an upper basin and a lower basin, between where the water originates and where there is water demand. It also said that we're going to manage this river on a 10-year running average because we recognize how dramatic the hydrology fluctuates. The compact rewritten, anybody who's thought about it and thought about what it might look like and what the implications are, all come to the same conclusion. You wouldn't want to do it. The other thing, a compact requires 7 states, all signatories to the compact, to be in agreement. You'll never get the 7 states in agreement any longer. And the way they got the 7 states in 1922 to agree was they over-allocated the river. That was the easy part. They knowingly over-allocated the river because that's what they could agree to. They over-allocated the river. There wasn't that level of demand and they didn't know how long it would take for that to happen, but part of the compact negotiations was the development of the building of Hoover Dam and Lake Mead, and it was always planned that there would be an upper basin reservoir that is now Lake Powell. So those were figured, and they figured, I mean, those two reservoirs together, just those two reservoirs, have capacity to hold 4 times the average annual flow of the Colorado River, or better. So you have a tremendous savings account to manage your expenses when you have a big year with a bonus and a bad year with a recession. So that's where we go. So just quickly to note, the other thing that the River District fought particularly hard for was that we will avoid disproportionate impacts to any single subbasin or region. Read, the West Slope is not going to have the target on its back alone. That we are going to share the obligations, we're going to share the duty and the burden of meeting the opportunity that this new pool in Lake Powell provides us. No action of the demand management of how we save the water can cause injury to somebody else. You want to make sure that if you participate as a voluntary, compensated, temporary saver of water, that your system, whatever you've done, doesn't injure somebody else who said, no, I don't want to be a part of that, other than the priority system. Go ahead.
So is the only way to start topping up the balance in that 500,000 acre feet to intentionally curtail, or if there's a exceptionally wet year and nobody changes their behavior, is it possible to say, okay, we're going to allocate some of that?
The only way to fill that, to contribute to that 500,000 acre foot pool, that special pool, is through deliberate curtailment of previously consumed water. Okay? So if we have a really good year, it'll flow to Lake Powell. It'll benefit all of us, but it won't do anything. That 500,000 acre feet will be a colored system. It will float on top of whatever's going in or out of Lake Powell.
And does it sit there, I guess, in perpetuity, kind of regardless? So then let's say everybody does it, we fill up the balance, and then it's 10 just really bad years, and it doesn't matter what anybody does, it's just getting depleted. Does that still sit there?
If we have 10 really bad years, we're going to use that. We won't sit there, we will use it. If we have 10 really good years, yes, it will still sit there. Now, I say that, I need to clarify that we're under what's called, for management and operations of the Colorado River, the federal government and the 7 states have agreed to what are called the interim guidelines. These were negotiated and signed in 2007. They expire in 2024. So, in fact, that 500,000 acre foot pool only exists on paper until 2024. But we will have to have new guidelines after that. Negotiations begin for those right away for the aftermath after 2024, and that pool is likely, very likely, to continue into the future. The last thing was that water users and water stakeholders will have an opportunity for input into how we build this demand management system. Real quickly, to finish this up and then open this up to more conversation, the whole idea is that we're sharing this pie of pain. This won't be without pain. But if it's compensated, it hopefully will not disproportionately affect agriculture. It won't dislocate existing agriculture. It may help the sustainability of our local ag. We're going to share that between the east slope and the west slope. This all won't be the west slope's problem. This is preventative maintenance, but it doesn't have to be like the dentist. It could be a little bit more like your retirement savings. This is a new program. This is, the advent of an IRA or the Roth IRA. This is a new way, this is a new opportunity for us, all of us, to be savers of water. The one thing we know is that the future will not look like the past. It's going to be a drier climate. It may be wetter, but it's going to be a drier river. We're going to have to deal with a declining supply of water and an increasing demand. We've got to be a little bit smarter. We've got to be a lot smarter about how we use that water. And we've got to, and we have to consider the equities in the changing uses of water. One of the important elements of how we get water and how we manage our water is forest health. And it's, you know, it's well-spaced trees that a fire that runs through here is going to run along the ground. A fire that runs through here is going to run through the crown fire. It's going to be the fires we saw at Lake Christine. It's going to be those explosive fires, the crown fires that rage across the landscape, and then have all the attendant problems post-fire that come along. It also means that we're all going to have to think about how we use water in our homes and in our yards and in our land use and our development. Gone are the days, I will say, I will declare today, gone are the days when you can have a bluegrass yard from fence to foundation. At least not everybody can. You can have a nice ball field, you can have a nice common area, you can have a nice spot for the dog in the backyard, but you can't have it from fence to foundation, and not in great big yards. And that's not unique to eastern Colorado. You know, we do it in Grand Junction, we do it in Glenwood Springs, we do it in Aspen, we do it in Vail. You know, we have to rethink how we're doing things. It's a new day, and we need to start looking a little more like the water ethic we all talk about. We need to look a little more like Tucson and a little more like Santa Fe than we do Windsor or Grand Junction. So that races you all through all of that. And I appreciate the questions that were asked. What else can I help with? How else can I confuse or confound?
This is confusing. If
I'm going to turn the lights
water
on.
is
Sorry.
slowed down, shut off, taken away, that kind of stuff, are the out-of-basin areas affected more than we are? Like the South Platte, New Mexico, and Pueblo, and all that. Does water come from somewhere first to fill the to make the obligations that we do have?
Good question. I will tell you what I've heard the state engineer. The state engineer is the water cop. He's the one that administers water rights in priority. Juniors get cut off first when there's not enough water. We don't have rules on how we will administer a compact curtailment. When the lower basin states say, you've not met your obligations, you need to curtail your water use, you owe us 500,000 acre-feet. What the state engineer says is we don't have rules. We don't know how we would administer that. We have a priority system, but that priority system runs in the Yampa Basin, in the White River, in the main stem of the Colorado, in the Gunnison, in the Uncompahgre. It doesn't run across those basins, the San Juan, Dolores, each of those. So you could, presumably, and the state engineer says, if I've got to, if I'm forced to administer a compact call today, all I have is the priority system. So he will start with the most junior of the whole Colorado, of all the uses of the Colorado River system. So that's not just those west slope basins.
Right.
That's the headwater diversions into the east slope. But they would be in priority. Our push, our fight, the Colorado River District's fight with the state was that we want an equitable system. That it isn't just by priority. That will hurt them by priority, but it will hurt an awful lot of us as well. We have large projects that have junior water rights. We have very senior water rights that, as I mentioned, rely on the relatively junior water rights of large storage. And without them, their senior water rights are insufficient. So the answer is everybody gets hurt.
But is there more hurt in certain areas than others? Or do they take 200 gallons from everybody, or however it works to fill up that?
They won't take 200 gallons from everybody. That's not how our system works. We'll shut off, we'll take everything, whether it's 200 gallons or 2,000, from the person with the most junior water rights, and keep going down that list of rights. That's the prior appropriation system.
So a small ditch up on Missouri Heights, say, the guy that has 2 or 3 acre feet of water a year, those guys would get cut off first.
He'll be treated like anybody else. It
Okay.
just depends on the seniority of his rights.
Okay.
It's not, agriculture, industrial, snowmaking, they're all treated equally under the priority system,
Okay.
except that, and importantly, except that the Colorado Constitution grants priority to municipal use. Municipal over agriculture, agriculture over industry. So what that means is not that there's still a
Right.
priority system and they all rank, and what matters is your date. But if municipality needs water, they can condemn an agricultural water right.
It means it's more important what's soccer than it is to have
Yeah.
a sandwich.
Yeah.
Like-
And that's our concern, is that
Right.
what are the alternatives? If we get to a compact curtailment, we can envision that Denver and Colorado Springs and Aurora and Boulder and Fort
Right.
Collins are all gonna open up their checkbook and they're gonna come over here. They will seek first to buy from willing sellers. And if they can't find enough willing sellers, they have the power of condemnation. And they will condemn it. They'll have to pay for it, but they will condemn it, and then we'll have water rights. And even if they buy it, even if they buy from a willing seller, I think it's a very different western Colorado if all those agricultural water rights and all those farms are owned by the city of Denver or Fort Collins. Yes.
Just out of curiosity, and I'm sorry if this is a naive question, where do golf courses rank in that?
Perfectly good question. And as a non-golfer, an important question to me.
Not either, yeah.
Yeah. But the answer is, it depends where their water comes from. Most of them, if they have a municipal, if they're just on the municipal system, Glenwood Springs, for instance, they're part of the municipal system. And if the municipal system is cut back, then they're cut back. Most of them, if you're in Vail or up here in Aspen, they have their own water rights. They primarily converted from agricultural water rights, so many of them are very senior water rights. And they have the underlying water right of wherever they get their water from. Right here.
So how do you address the issue of the senior water rights relying on the junior water rights if those get condemned or taken away somehow? How do you make sure seniority actually exists?
Let me see if I answer your question.
Sorry,
So the
if they're
system,
relying on the junior water rights to get their water.
they're not relying on their junior water. The senior water right relies on his senior water right. So the state will curtail the junior.
Yeah.
The state will curtail the junior in order for the senior to get their water if there's not water for everybody. And so that won't change, and it doesn't matter who owns that junior.
So they'll be completely depleted in order to fulfill.
The junior will.
The
Yeah.
senior.
They have a commissioner that goes around and checks.
Yeah.
There's a water cop who manages that system in priority.
Mhm.
Write down a list of dates.
So how much of that is the agriculture water then?
You saw the big pie chart? Most
Yeah,
of it's agricultural water use. And in defense of the prior appropriation system, I think of the prior appropriation system as simply a good neighbor policy. It's easy to say, well, that's not fair. If you're talking about sharing the pie of pain, everybody should have to give up 200 gallons of water and we'll all share equally. And that's not the system. The system is that you were here first and you began using water for your city, your town, your golf course, your snowmaking, your mining operation. You were here first, and then you moved in. You could do anything you want with the water that's available as long as you get your water fulfilled. If there's not enough water for both of you, who should be cut off? The new guy. Somebody walks into the room and says, oh, see, I know I want to sit. They can sit anywhere they want as long as there's an empty seat, as long as there are enough seats left. But they can't kick you out of your seat. You were there first. Yes, sir?
On a big picture basis, I'd be curious if you can address this. my understanding that each of the 7 states in the lower basin have all recently put together their plans.
Yes,
Okay, and they've submitted those to the Bureau of Reclamation,
yes.
who is going, as I understand it, is going to be using the next several years, next 4 years, to decide what the legal changes are going to be beyond 2026.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's after the interim guidelines expire.
Okay,
Yeah.
people such as yourself that have been, that are familiar with these processes and have opinions about it, and the people you know who have strong, that you respect, that have strong opinions about it, what are the big picture implications that are expected beyond 2026, given these negotiations, this very complicated set of legal issues that are going to be considered and assessed and weighed and thought out in courts, et cetera, over the next 4 or 5 years? Number one, is the general public going to have a pretty good view of this? And number two, what are your people thinking? What is your opinion, big picture, on the big changes in the water laws between now and 2026?
Okay. Great question. Could take another 2 hours to answer it. Let me hit 3 observations. One is that I think the federal government, as the water master, as the ultimate responsible party for managing and operating the Colorado River, they will continue to follow the precedent that has been set by both Democrat and Republican administrations. That precedent is they will go to the states, they will go to the 7 Colorado River Basin states and the Republic of Mexico and challenge us to come up with a true consensus agreement on the answer to your question.
Didn't the states already do that?
Well,
and submit that to the federal government?
We've done it for the Drought Contingency Plan. It's a let's call it a stopgap.
They're going to challenge these plans? Is that the idea?
No, but they're going to decide whether these plans are sufficient, and they're going to look further down the road for what happens if the drought continues, what happens if our water supply simply isn't as great as our demand, how is that pie of pain going to be divided? So there are some longer term implications. Very few believe that this will solve the problem. This will delay the problem, and if Mother Nature is kind to us, it may solve the problem for a period of time, but it may get us beyond the expiration of the current interim guidelines. Another observation, I think you will find the states, they won't reallocate the river back to the compact, shouldn't we renegotiate the compact? No, but like any contract, it can be amended by mutual agreement of all the parties. So all 7 states have to agree if you're going to change a contract that is the compact, and only with their agreement can it be changed. And I think you will see that. I think there are a number of issues that are not black and white in that contract. There are a lot of issues about equity. There are a lot of issues about whether or not the Upper Basin has a delivery obligation of 75 million acre feet over every 10-year period, or a non-depletion obligation. In other words, if Mother Nature isn't providing as much water as we thought in 1922, is it really our obligation to keep the lower basin whole? Is it the Upper Basin's obligation to keep the lower basin whole? Those are issues that will be litigated literally for generations if we go to litigation and not consensus. If we can collaborate on an answer to that question, then we can get somewhere.
Do you think it's?
I think the history is that we have done that.
Okay.
We have only done it when the federal government has forced us and given us a very hard deadline.
Okay.
But yes, we have a history of doing that.
What was your third
Are
point?
you okay? Maybe you want more
I'm
question?
fine.
Let's take another question or two, and
Okay.
then we can, yeah.
Was there a third point that you could do in 30 seconds? So you gave me the first 2 points.
Yeah.
Was there a third?
So the third point, and a big one, is I think that the Upper Basin, because the obligation is on us to make that delivery to the lower basin. So they divided the river in half. They thought they were dividing the river in half. There was water for the upper basin, water for the lower basin, and it was roughly half and half. Now we know that our half doesn't exist, that we have whatever's left over after we provide them with the first half that is bigger than half. So I think that states will come to an agreement not to litigate over a compact, not to have a compact curtailment, not to administer that, not to force the upper basin. But that can only happen by agreement. And to get that significant concession from the lower basin, the upper basin is going to have to give considerably. There's some gives there that will be painful and will be, but I think it will be public too, where we'd like to go. Let me go to somebody that hasn't asked. Yeah, and I'll be around.
Did you say that there was something that was grandfathered in before the compact?
Yes.
To allow us to meet our interstate obligations, and if so, could you expound on that?
Sure. So the compact was a new law, a new agreement that was arrived at in 1922. To be fair, it's a new law, a new agreement, a new contract. It doesn't apply to those who have water rights prior to that, who have water uses prior to that agreement. So that if we have to curtail our uses in the upper basin, in the 4 states, Wyoming, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, if we have to curtail our uses in order to meet our compact obligation, those who had water, those who were using water as of the date of that agreement, 1922, they're protected. They can't be curtailed.
Do we fall within that protected zone
Who's we?
in this area?
No. I mean, some do. Yes, there are some, primarily the agricultural uses. Aspen is one of the oldest cities. It was a much larger city at one time. Its water rights are nice and senior. Most of the cities in this area have a portfolio of water rights from senior to junior. So the juniors will be cut off, can be cut off. Our goal is to try to keep that chaos, that curtailment from happening. The other issue is sort of looking out to the future. You know, will the Front Range be cut off from their water uses? I don't think they will be cut off completely. Denver won't lose 50% of its water. Colorado Springs won't lose 70% of its water. But nor do I think Grand Junction or Glenwood Springs is going to lose all of its water because it might be junior or lose all the junior. Health and human safety will always come first in any judge's mind. I mean, you're not going to take water away wholesale from a city of 3 million people. And that's why we want to work with Denver to come up with these kind of agreements and say, it's going to be painful, but we're going to share that pain. It's not going to just be Western Colorado, and we're not going to change our lifestyle. We're going to maintain our agriculture. We're going to maintain our opportunities to the maximum extent possible.
Chris, why don't we just take one more question,
All right.
and then we'll
You get the last
wrap
one.
and
Oh, great. Where do the Indian reservations fall in the senior to junior pecking order?
Great question. The short answer is they're senior. There's a Supreme Court case called the Winters case. The Winters doctrine says that the enough water to fulfill the purpose of the reservation was impliedly reserved when Congress reserved the lands that are the Indian reservations. The point of taking nomadic tribes and making them agrarian was that they would farm that reservation. We gave them really crappy land in the desert. It takes a lot of water to farm really crappy land in the desert. They have some very senior and very large quantity water rights. Not all of those reservations have been quantified as to exactly what their rights are, but the date of their water rights are senior. They are the date of the reservation itself.
Thank you.
ask them. This is the whole point of the Watershed Institute, so that you would meet people like Chris that have all these answers. So please come talk to him. But he won't be here all night either. So, I mean, unless he wants to be. So if I could just like wrap in a couple more things. This is, you know, we talked about, you talked about the climate has been changing. The data is there. We're not getting as much moisture. Can we augment that? And that's a perfect lead in to the next topic on the next Watershed Institute, which is called Plant to Seed, Grow a Snowpack, a discussion of cloud seeding in the Upper Colorado River Basin. So Dave Kanzer is a deputy chief engineer, works with Chris in the Colorado River District. He's going to come and talk to us about the science behind cloud seeding. Where has it been working well? What are some of the challenges? What are the success stories? So come and hear that, because that'll be another intriguing conversation as well. And then because this climate has been changing, we've also been seeing new species of plants here that suck up a lot of water, one of them being tamarisk. So on March 11th, that date was just confirmed today, we'll have someone from River's Edge West, who's based in Grand Junction. They work in Colorado, they work throughout the Colorado River Basin, so in other states. They're going to come and talk to us about restoring critical riparian habitat in the age of invasives. So we know tamarisk is all over. Are there new potentially new species that we're going to have to be looking out for as climate is changing? So as I wrap this all into the work that we're doing and the Roaring Fork Watershed, I don't know how many of you know this, but several years ago, I don't know the date, sorry, maybe April does, the Roaring Fork Conservancy worked with all the municipal water providers in this valley and came up with the Roaring Fork Regional Water Efficiency Plan. That plan, all the municipalities in this valley have signed in on that. And there's lots of work that we're doing with that. You can read about it on our website, talk to Rick or myself after tonight, or call us at some point. We're happy to tell you the projects we're working on with that. The city of Aspen has actually incorporated, April, help me with the wording, it's a landscape,
water efficient landscape ordinance.
Thank you. And on March 5th, if you're interested or you have a landscaper and you want that particular person to become more water efficient and even certified as a water efficient landscaper, we worked with the city of Aspen to bring a certification program to the city. They're going to do a lunch and learn on March 5th in Aspen. It's totally free. If you want more information, it's on our website also. So that's one thing. The third thing and final thing is that in July, every year, we collaborate with the Twin Lakes Reservoir and Canal Company. They are one of 24 trans-basin mountain diversions in the state of Colorado. They're the 5th largest one in the state, and they're on the headwaters of the Roaring Fork River. We take a tour of that every July. You are welcome to come. I want to tell you that it's the most popular program that we offer. We don't even do PR for it, and it usually fills the day that registration goes live.
I'll attest, it's a great tour.
It is awesome. We have the experts from Colorado Springs come and talk to us about the engineering is amazing. You should come, if for nothing else, just to see how over 100 years ago, people were thinking about us today. And I think that's what Chris is talking about. This planning, we've got to plan for the next generation because somebody planned for us. And so it's really cool, and it's very cool. We take Jeeps down Lincoln Creek Road to Grizzly Reservoir. You get to go inside the tunnel, not through the tunnel. Don't tell anybody to do that. We're not allowed to go through the tunnel, but we go in it, and it's really fascinating.
I got to do that once.
I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did. So thank you again, Chris. Thank you. I should let you know this was also live streamed on our Facebook page, so if you know someone that would be interested in seeing this, please send them to our Facebook page. I don't think you need to have an Facebook account to watch it, but if there's that 2, 3, 4, 5 half hours, minutes, 30 minutes that you're like, what did Chris say? You can go back and watch the video. Okay, thank you, and Christmas Day. Thank you.